What's up guys, Hello to Football Talk here, back with a little bit of a different video. There's about a month left in the NFL season, and Pro Bowl voting is in full swing, so I decided to record me filling out my own ballot. You can do this as many times as you like, and have a real impact on who gets to go to Vegas in early February. Before we get into this, just let me say that I'm not a big fan of how this whole thing is structured, voting for 6 players at each position, even though some of them you may only have 1 on the field, while at others you may have up to 3 at the same time. And then just some of the statistics they chose to list them by. But that's what I'm here for, just to give a little bit of an insight, share my thoughts, maybe get some of you to not simply vote for your favorite team's players and the guys highest up on the list. So let's get our votes in now. Starting with the quarterback position, of course, and we can take off the obvious ones here. Tom Brady, phenomenal season at 44 years old, might actually show a little more mobility than we've seen in the past, and still in a phenomenal arm at that stage. Gets a little too much credit at times for what his team does, but can't deny what he's done. Matt Stafford, just put on display again against the Cardinals now, that big Monday Night Football game, getting that win. Some of the things he's been doing for this team, which really, under Sean McVay, they've been primarily a running team with Jared Goff in the center, but now with him, they got 2 predictable times with the passing game, almost no explosive runs on the ground, and it was really all on him. So I'm glad they're finding a little more of a balance here, and Stafford can really show off his arm talent. Justin Herbert has had a phenomenal season himself. Talk about the arm talent, that throw he made to Jalen Guyton, that deep ball that he had to move off the spot, reset his feet and just launched it through the air like 60 plus yards. Absolutely crazy talent. And he's really getting better at managing games, understanding situations, and being really aware of what's going on third downs. He's really improved in terms of that aspect. Then there's going to be some names here. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers. To me, right now, I would actually put him number 1 in the MVP race. The Packers now on top of the NFC. If they remain there, I think he should get the votes here. Brady by far the obvious favorite at this point in terms of betting. But you look at the games, how much they depend on him. You watched that one game with Jordan Love, just couldn't put anything going offensively. Which brings us then, now it gets a little more tricky, I would say. When we scroll down here with Carla Murray, I believe he's a guy who should definitely be on here. Before Monday night, I would have actually probably been able to make an argument for him to be the MVP right now. He's missed 3 games and his team went 2-1, I understand that. But you can't tell me that they're the same group without him. Things he can do in structure now with Cliff Kingsbury, having developed his game plan a little bit this year, and what Carla can deliver off script. It's just a phenomenal combination. The Cardinals are still one of the very best teams in the NFL, in large part to the things that he can do. And then I believe we have 1 more vote left, and this really is a tough one here. As we go back to the top, Patrick Mahomes, you look at the numbers, another great season seems like. I would say, if you take away those 2 Raiders games where he's thrown like 7 touchdowns and no interceptions, his numbers would look a lot different, and I really think he's been kind of streaky, times kind of inaccurate, side-arming throws that there is no need to actually do it that way, just go with a normal release. Some of those things, some had to be too aggressive at times when his defense was really bad early on, and some of the tendencies that he's created, he's obviously been picking up, and the Chiefs are forced to be reckoned with in the AFC once again. But I think there's some guys that had better season. You look at Dak Prescott, also kind of an up and down year, especially now lately, the calf has been bothering him. Joe Burrow, a very nice season, just has been turning the ball over a little bit too much, a little too aggressive at times, even though I like that, but he's not on the same level as like a Stafford, Herbert, Rodgers in terms of the arm talent. So, and down here obviously you have Lamar Jackson as well, banged up right now, has missed basically 2.5 games of what it is. He made a case for him to be the MVP early on, and he still carries this team that is really riddled by injuries. But with what we've seen lately, that 4 interception game, I can't quite put him up there, and I'm actually going to go with Josh Allen here, because you watch that game on Sunday against Brady, and they're saying that Brady outdueled Josh Allen. I don't really see it. To me, Allen was the best guy on the field. Some of the things he did as a runner, over 100 yards rushing in that one, and just how he carries that team, absolutely no running game at times, and I think he deserves some more credit here. Which brings us to the running back position. And the first 4 names here are pretty easy ones. Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, Alvin Koch, Nick Chubb. You look at all those guys. Jonathan Taylor, the absolute big play machine on the ground. Probably the most dangerous guy when he gets it handed to him. He can break an 80-yard run any second. Mixon, some of the things we've seen from him really being a tough runner, catching the ball out of the backfield. You don't see it here. One fumble, that was a costly one against the Chargers. Really flipped that game and put it in hands of LA. But other than that, he's been really strong. One of the best goal line backs in the NFL. The Alvin Koch, just last week we saw it, the 200-yard performance against the Steelers. That explosiveness that he has to rip off big runs as well, contributing in the pass game. I think he's one of the best weapons at that position as well. With Nick Chubb, who arguably is the best pure runner, along with Jonathan Taylor in the NFL right now. Now that Derrick Henry has been injured, has missed a few games himself, but he's clearly one of the best backs behind one of the best offensive lines, which is a match made in heaven. You see it here, 6 yards per attempt. And as we get to the second row here, you see Austin Eckler. Obviously, this is just rushing yards, 9 touchdowns this way. I think he has another 3 touchdowns for the air. And just the things that he can do in terms of contributing in the pass game, I don't really see how you can't put him up there, because we've seen him take over some games, but at the same time, just that steady presence that he is, catching anger routes out of the backfield. Linebackers look foolish by making them miss, but at the same time having the power to break tackles and rip off big plays. Yeah, Naji Harris, he's had a very good season as a rookie, but just very inefficient in the way he does things. I know it's not always the most advantageous spots, having that extra man in the box and just not really a lot of room to operate. But I don't really see how we can put him up there. When there's a few other names that I want to look at here. Antonio Gibson, 5 fumbles. He's just been very costly at times for Washington. I wouldn't want to put him that high. Ezekiel Elliott, not even the best back in Dallas this year. So Leonard Fournette, he's had a very strong run now this last month or so. And I believe he deserves some consideration here. Elijah Mitchell, really good rookie in that San Francisco offense, and Kyle Shanahan. But yeah, you have those 2 New England backs. If Damian Harris, and if we scroll down, did we find him actually? Ramondre Stevenson, might have missed him. Either way, those 2 guys are kind of taken away from each other in terms of production. But that 2 at the backfield, really a problem to deal with for New England. Because as we saw against the Bills, they're going to punish you on the ground if there's any weakness there. Trent Williams, the rookie from Denver. Anybody who's ever listened to me knows how high I am on him. But with having Melvin Gordon there, who we have right down here, almost the exact same production in terms of the rushing yards. I think Gordon has been a little more productive through the air. But once again, one of those situations where they take away from each other. So really, to me, it's probably down to Alvin Kamara, who has been out for a few games, and then Cordell Patterson. And that's actually the way I'm leaning right now, because you see it once again here. Patterson is like 100 yards behind him in terms of rushing. And Kamara is a phenomenal pass-catching back. But Cordell Patterson is basically half running back, half receiver, the way he's been used. Just that Swiss Army knife that he has been for the Falcons all season long. Just consideration here. And I'm going to give him his vote here because he's had a phenomenal season going both ways. We also have DeAndre Swift here for the Lions. He's been missing some time now recently. One of the better pass-catching backs as well. I really think that he's going to be a focal point for this Detroit offense going forward, whatever they're doing next season and beyond. Which brings us down to the wide receiver position. And once again, there's really not that much to discuss here at the top. Cooper Kupp, Devonte Adams, Justin Jefferson. Then I'm going to definitely go with Deebo Samuel. And let's get to the other names in a second. But Cooper Kupp, probably the most complete receiver in the NFL right now in terms of route running, lining up at different spots, the things he can do after the catch, working his way open when the play is extended, but also just as a route runner, he's basically uncoverable one-on-one right now. And even if he's bracketed, he finds a way to find that open space and create room for Matt Stafford to fit the ball into him. Justin Jefferson for the Minnesota Vikings. Even now with Adam Thielen out of the lineup, he's another one of those guys. We saw it against the Steelers, gave him a lot of cushion early on, and he just thrown those speed outs and hitch routes. He's really a game breaker, and it's down the field where he really scares you, which is why he gets that cushion. But he can get it done in a number of different ways. Devonte Adams, not really much to say here. Until this season, probably the best receiver in the NFL for the last couple of years. Now with Cooper Kupp, he's really making a name for himself, and it's really a 1A, 1B situation. But the way Aaron Rodgers trusts in him in big spots, what he can do in the red zone, it's just phenomenal. And Deebo Samuel, really not that much to say here. Leading the 49ers in rushing and receiving, I mean, that by itself should qualify you for this list. He's just a guy, you put the ball in his hands, he's going to make it happen. whether it's on those speed sweeps, shallow crossers, glance routes on the backside, off those RPOs and stuff like that. You put the ball in his hands, he becomes a running back, running over people, breaking tackles, just really fun to watch, him in the open field. And I'm going to go with Jamar Chase here, the rookie, 10 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards already now, and you see that mark here, over 18 yards per catch. That is really what stands out to me, that the way that they use him down the field. I know T. Higgins has been coming along for Cincinnati recently, and he had slowed down, but we saw it against the 49ers, who have some weaknesses on the outside. Just one-on-one, he's really an issue to deal with because he's such a physical freak. And then the last vote, this is really tough. There's a bunch of guys I like here. Chris Godwin, the things he can do as a PPR monster basically for your fantasy team, and the way that he keeps the chains moving, phenomenal run blocker as well. Tyreek Hill, of course, always belongs in that conversation. The things he can do down the field, but this year more so with all those too high shells, the way that they throw the ball to him underneath, and just force your corners and safeties to tackle him, which you can barely get a hand on him at times. But then also, when he has a chance, that way he can strike down the field any moment. Tyler Lockett has been coming along lately. Deontay Johnson, heavily targeted for the Steelers. Stephon Diggs also kind of been getting going again. And further down here, those second-year players like CeeDee Lamb, Michael Pittman Jr., some rookies that deserve some consideration here, Jalen Waddle as well. It is really a tough one, but I think I'm just going to have to go with Tyreek Hill here, because if it was a wide receiver draft right now, there's no way he's not going in the top 5 or so. But overall for this group, you see it right now here, it just makes no sense that you can only vote for 6 guys when offense is an 11 personnel primarily anyway. What makes it even more ridiculous now is next up they're going to ask us to vote for 6 fullbacks. And the craziest thing here, there's only 8 names on this list, so you just have to exclude 2 of them, which I don't really understand. I don't think it's fair. So what I'm going to do here is just choose the best guy in the NFC, which is Kyle Juszczyk to me, and then the AFC, Project Pat, Patrick Ricard for the Ravens. Both major keys to the team's rushing attack and get used in a lot of different ways, especially with Juice in San Francisco, all the different ways that Kyle Shanahan deploys him, where he may be leading the way from the backside of the formation, toss play, one snap, and then run a seam route from the slot the very next. Just crazy versatility for the position. And there are some other worthy candidates, but it just feels wrong to vote for 6 fullbacks when no one at 2 will play in the actual game, and even that in limited capacity. So instead I'm going to move on to the tight end position. And once again, let's get the obvious ones out of the way. Travis Kelsey, George Kittle, Mark Andrews. You look at Andrews in particular now leading the entire NFL at that position, receptions and receiving yards. How involved he is in that Ravens offense that doesn't have those superstar receivers of Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman, both very good young guys. But Lamar, and even when they put in Tyler Huntley, they rely so much on him. At times too much to a fault, as we saw in that Cleveland game where Lamar threw 4 interceptions. But what he can do as a receiver, and he's really been steadily improving in the run game as well. Travis Kelsey, not that much to say here. Not his best season, he's been slowing down recently, which has hurt my fantasy team personally. But I don't think in terms of just if you have to drop back for one drive and you have to put in one tight end, I don't think there's really another choice here. But if I had a full game and I'm asking those guys to stay in line as blockers, get on the move, off play action, make things happen after the catch, George Kittle is on a different planet right now. The things he's done in these last 2 games, I think like nearly 300 yards and like 4 touchdowns combined. He's just a monster truck when the ball's in his hands. And he has so much joy with just driving people off the screen in the run game. He's a real contributor, and in terms of just at his position right now, there's only a couple of guys that come into mind that play as well and as complete as he does. But it gets a little more complicated because you see down here TJ Hawkinson, he looked like a surefire pick a couple of months ago, but has been slowing down, not as involved in the Detroit offense, and been banged up at times. You have Dallas Goedert for the Eagles. Also missed a few games, but had some high-leverage moments. Dalton Schultz, super consistent for the Cowboys in the run and pass game. Not quite worthy of the Pro Bowl votes, but one of the more underrated guys at the position. Zach Ertz, touchdown machine for the Cardinals. One of the votes definitely to me has to go to Kyle Pitts. As a rookie, the things he's done, I know he's not been quite as involved in a few weeks now, but had a couple of big catches this past Sunday. And what he's doing as a rookie in terms of just the receiving work, you see the one mark that I don't like here, 1 touchdown. That's kind of crazy actually. But the way that they're using him, at times as a pure X receiver, but also being able to work as an H-back, in line at times. Not his very best work, and I thought he'd have some problems with that early on in his rookie season. But winning down the field, I think he has more 15-yard catches than any other tight end in the NFL right now. And so he deserves a vote here. The other guy, Rob Gronkowski, what is there really to say? I thought he was done when he came in last year, and he looked really slow early on, but definitely picked up the pace throughout the season and then into the playoffs. And this year, when he's been out there, I think he's missed like 4 games. He's catching like 6-7 passes every week and breaking the tackle at least every time he catches it, because he's just such a huge man that you can't really bring down to the turf, and still very good in the run game as well. And then that final vote, I'm really considering these 2 guys here, Darren Waller and Mike Gesicki, both definitely more receiving options, and haven't had a few moments where they've not been as involved. Waller in the season opener got like 20 targets. That has definitely slowed down, and he's been banged up this last few weeks, missed a couple of games now. So I'm actually going to go with Mike Gesicki here, just more involved in the offense consistently throughout the season. Had a couple of duds, but in general, just one of those guys working down the seams. Doesn't give you much after the catch, but going up in the red zone as well, the way that he can extend and make big plays for his team. That brings us to the big guys. The offensive line, overall, no stats of course, even though they do have partnerships with Pro Football Focus and others. So let's not get into that, but let's first look at these tackles here. And since I've already done this, I know that I have to move down here. You can watch along. Garrett Bowles, another good season, not as good as last year. Dwayne Brown, also for the Seahawks, he's been slowing down a bit. Eric Fisher for the Colts, he's been really coming in and doing a really good job for them at the left tackle spot. Lane Johnson for the Eagles, always somebody that deserves consideration. But let's move down here first, and I'll go up for a couple of guys in a second again. First, obviously, Trent Williams, easily the best tackle in football right now. Absolutely dominating in the run and pass game. He's had one of the best seasons for an offensive tackle that I've ever seen, and I think he's in a league of his own right now. The guy probably closest to him when he's out there, we have to go up a little bit here. Tyron Smith for the Cowboys, missed a couple of games, and I'm a little worried that he's going to slow down with those injuries again at the end of the season, because that's just what he's been for the last few years. But he's been a monster when he has been out there. Andrew Whitworth for the Rams, still doing it at like 38, 39 years old, I think. Did he just turn 39 or something? To me, a Hall of Famer, has been doing it for so long in Cincinnati and then in LA, where he's just been getting more shine. But really one of the best left tackles for a decade plus. Then with the young guy in his second season. People have been kind of forgetting about him, I feel like. But you look at that Bucs offensive line, probably the best in the NFL at this moment. And he's a big reason in that. And then I'm going to move up a little bit here again. Roshan Slater, the best rookie offensive tackle in this class. You look a couple of spots over Penei Sewell. He's been really solid for Detroit. Has to clean up some of the things that he does in pass protection, but already dominating in the run game. And I think he's going to get a lot more of these votes. But I'm going to go with Slater this season. Him and Corey Linsley have really transformed that offensive line for LA. And given Justin Herbert a lot of protection. And also in the run game, they've been improving. He's just one of those guys who wants those one-on-ones with those all-pro talents at the edge and getting the best of them more often than not. And then the last vote, this is a bit of a tough one. We look up here, we see Donovan Smith has had a solid season. Braden Smith for the Colts, another one of those guys, not getting enough recognition. Michael Winner is an interesting one because he's been kind of splitting time between guard and tackle. Obviously been playing very well, but not quite up there, I would say. To me, it's really between Ryan Ramczyk here of the Saints, just been doing it for a few years now. I said last year, I believe, I had him as the best right tackle, and I think the year before as well. Colton Miller for the Raiders, another one of those guys who deserves some consideration. The things that he's done, how he's improved as a pass protector, really phenomenal work. After I didn't believe he would be one of those guys coming out of UCLA. And then the other guy here, Jordan Mailata, he's actually going to get my vote. Just deserves more recognition. A big reason why the Eagles have been so dominant with their run game recently. Just burying guys, widening that B-gap on the front side of zone runs. But also in pass protection, rock solid dude. And that has us moving on to the inside, first with the guards here. First thing that sticks out, those 2 Cleveland guys, Joel Bitonio, and as we scroll down here, Wyatt Teller. how well the Browns have run the ball. Those two guys both being able to get on the move as pullers where there are really problems, but also at the point of attack. Two of the best run blockers, and also in the pass game, not that much to really criticize there either. And then Zach Martin, he's been the best offensive guard in football this season for the Cowboys. Another one where you just don't want to be in a phone booth with him. If he has a down block on you and you just have to hold your ground, you better be able to squat like 800 pounds, because otherwise he's going to move you off the spot. Gwen Nelson, not his best year. He's been banged up coming into the year, and we've seen it at times, but still playing at a really high level. And I just think he's one of those guys who you can give a vote every single season. Next one that I think deserves to have some spotlight on him is Matt Fowler for the Chargers, actually. We just talked about Roshan Slater, along with Corey Linsley. This guy is right between those two dudes, and he's been playing phenomenal football, especially in the run game. Being able to, on those combo blocks, to work up to the second level, secure the down block. In the pass game as well, really tough to get around. Not a lot of false steps, and just been getting the job done for the Chargers. And then the final one, you can look at Chris Lindstrom here for the Falcons. He's been having a really good season, living up to the draft status as like a top 15 pick, I believe. You look at it again here from the top, nothing that really sticks out here. Eli Mapet, obviously another good season for the Bucks. But really have to move down here. Roger Saffold, another guy who's underrated every single season, I believe. Not his best here, though. Trey Smith for the Chiefs as a rookie. Just a mean dude in the run game. Comes in with some attitude. All of that. Has had a few issues in pass protection, so I'm not quite sure if he belongs here. Kevin Zeitler for the Ravens, actually quietly one of the best guards. I don't believe has given up a sack yet. But I'm going to go with Brandon Scherf. Just been doing it for such a long time in Washington. Stays at that level. We kind of forget about him because he's so good. But really another one of those guys, just a mainstay at the position, the Pro Bowl, and has been another strong season. And then finally the center position, which once again we're voting for 6 guys here. Not totally sure if that's the right approach, since there's only going to be 2 on the field and maybe 1 backup that really gets some playing time. But once again, let's get the obvious ones out of the way. Referenced in a few times, Corey Linsley, the best center in football his last few years. Ever since Jason Kelsey, he has kind of declined a little bit, but believe it or not, he still belongs up there, having another strong season for the Eagles. Not quite in his prime at this point, but in the run game, pass game, the way he communicates, phenomenal player, another one of those guys who deserves to be in the Hall of Fame one day probably. And then Creed Humphrey, the rookie for the Chiefs. I think PFF's #1 rated center still, and I had him as the #1 center as well in the draft as a first-round grade. I could not believe that he went as late as he did, and the Chiefs really got a steal on him, especially looking at some of the other center options that were selected in the second round. So it was a major steal, and been getting it done for KC from day one. Then, of course, Ryan Kelly for the Colts. I talked about Quentin Nelson. I didn't really mention Mark Lewinsky on the left side at guard. Those 4 guys on the interior, just been getting it done for the Colts week in, week out. Big reason why Jonathan Taylor has been going off as much as he has. And also in the pass game, really tough to get around, great at communicating twists and stuff like that. And that has us moving on. You look at a couple of guys here in this region. Ryan Jensen for the Bucks. Kind of overrated, I would say, because he's one of those guys, in-your-face, chippy offensive lineman, personal protector for Brady. That's why a lot of people love him. I'm sure if he's quite that type of player, but does deserve some consideration here. Ben Jones for the Titans. Not his best year, but another solid season. Rodney Hudson will definitely be on this list, but he's been just missing too much time. And with that, I'm going to move back to the top here, because David Andrews is a guy that I believe deserves some credit here. Had been slowing down a little bit these last few years, but another great season, one of his best ones yet, you can argue. With that approach of running the ball, just getting in your face, the things that Andrews does in the run game for them is really special. And then the final one, that's a bit of a tough one here, because I mentioned a few of these guys in this region. Brandon Linder, not his best season. Mitch Morse, also, along with Eric McCoy, just not quite at the level that I want to see them at. J.C. Treader, solid choice here. Alex Mack for the 49ers, definitely the wrong end of his career, but has been playing very well for the 49ers this season. But I really want to give this to Bradley Bozeman here of the Ravens. To me, the most consistent guy on that Ravens O-line. You look at some of the issues they had with snaps last season in particular. He's really helped at that. And just in the run and pass game, a really solid contributor. And that does it for the offensive side of the ball. So let's move on to the defense, starting with the defensive end position. And sacks, of course, aren't everything, but these first three guys here obviously belong down there. Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Trey Hendrickson. You look at those guys. I mean, Garrett, that quadruple he had against the Ravens was just ridiculous. Forcing the strip, scooping up the ball and turning it into a touchdown. The most effective pass rusher at this very moment. And also an elite run defender, so really there's nothing to say here. My pick for Defensive Player of the Year right now. Nick Bosa, not that far behind him to be honest. Every single game it seems like he's getting a couple of sacks. Just creating terror in the run and pass game as well. Just one of those guys who doesn't get enough credit. I have no idea why we were all celebrating him as a rookie. He's actually better than that after a year off where he was injured. And I think people have just been sleeping on him, not really catching up on what he's been doing in San Francisco. Trey Hendrickson, one of the league leaders in sacks last season, and was kind of labeled as this guy, a try-hard dude. This is not going to be sustainable. Going over to Cincinnati, and he's really turned around the defensive line. Along with some of the other additions that they made. Sam Hubbard, you see him down here. He's also been a really good player, homegrown guy. But he's the alpha on the defensive line and deserves his credit here. Max Crosby is the guy down here. His production, I have no idea. He's at 5.5, I believe, right now for sacks. Also the tops in terms of pressures and tackles for loss. He looked like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Has been slowing down a little bit, just like the entire Raiders team has. But he's been the best player overall, along with Derek Carr. Those two guys have been really leading the offense and defense respectively. And then there's a bunch of guys in this range, like I said, that deserve to be mentioned here. Yannick Ngakoue actually leading the Raiders in sacks, which is kind of funny because he's not at the same level as Max Crosby in my opinion, but has been getting that production as more of the speed rusher along with Crosby. And then Jonathan Grenard for the Texans, one of those names that nobody's familiar with at this point. Wasn't labeled a super high upside guy coming out of college, but can win in a lot of different ways as a pass rusher. And has been one of the two consistent players for the Texans on defense. A little further down here, Jadeveon Clowney has had a bounce-back season. Marcus Davenport establishing himself as the top pass rusher and overall defensive lineman for the Saints. After it was for a long time Cam Jordan. And then Trey Hendrickson, of course, who we just talked about before he moved on to Cincinnati. But really when it comes down to the two guys I consider here, Denico Autry, the things he's doing for the Titans in terms of rushing the passer from the interior, pushing the pocket, also in the run game, lining up at that 4-eye or 5 spots. I'm going to go with Randy Gregory here for the Cowboys. When he's been available, playing at a really high level, finally living up to this draft status. I think it was actually early in the second round, but it was projected to be a top 10 pick. Some of the off-field stuff kept him from really going as high as he should have probably in terms of pure talent. That interception he had where he tipped the ball to himself on a screen pass, phenomenal play, and just a speedball he's off the edge. Really been coming into his own. And now let's move on to the defensive tackles. I could really just go with this top row of 6 guys here and be done with it. But let's get into it. Jonathan Allen, Jeffrey Simmons, Chris Jones, Cam Hayward, probably the best interior guy this season. DeForest Buckner really stirs the pot for the Colts, I believe, up front. And then, of course, you have to go with Aaron Donald. I wanted to show some love here to Javon Hargrave, and you see it with 7.5 sacks. Also playing the run really tough. One of the most underrated players for a while now, and now the production is starting to live up to the type of player that he actually is. And when I went through the ballot on Monday, I was like, can I make an argument for leaving Aaron Donald off the list here? Mostly because I know that a lot of people are going to show him love, and he's going to get his votes, especially by those casual fans. But then Donald absolutely kills the right guard on the very first snap against the Cardinals and ends the night with 3 sacks to knock off the top team in the NFL record-wise. I just couldn't leave him off. But I want some more of those casual fans as well. Look at Javon Hargrave. You see the production here as well, which is why I'm feeling quite good about him getting some votes here. But been playing phenomenal football. Larry Ogunjobi for the Bengals. Then with Larry Ogunjobi for the Bengals. One of those 3 techniques, get up the field, create chaos. He's been a difference maker for the Bengals. Quinn Williams, not quite as good as he was last year, but one of the better young defensive tackles in the game. Those 2 Tampa Bay guys, Ndamukong Suh and even more so Vita Vea, just absolute monster in the run game, cannot be moved off the spot. And he's just been driving people backwards into the lap of the quarterback all season long, I feel like. then Kenny Clark, to me the best nose tackle in the game right now. And he's one of the few guys who actually stays on the field on third downs and can really contribute in the pass game as well. Quite a few other guys who do deserve to be mentioned here, like Deron Payne, Leonard Williams, of course. Not really enough time to go all the way down here, but you would see some guys that actually make some big plays on some days, just not quite have that production matching up to it. And with that, I want to move on to the outside linebackers at first, because I want to discuss something that is an issue overall with the ballot, how it's structured, especially with the front seven, where you will now have defensive ends and outside linebackers separate, but they're still listed by the amount of sacks, even though now you have some outside linebackers in this category that barely get a chance to rush and would be much better served to be grouped with the inside guys in an off-ball linebacker category, while you have edge rushers and interior defensive linemen, which will also benefit those guys playing defensive end in more of a 3-4 base front. But that's just how it is for now, and we'll have to live with it, I guess. Although we have to make our voices heard to some degree here, and I always try to emphasize that point. But with the options that we do have here, the obvious ones, TJ Watt, another one of those guys right in the running for the Defensive Player of the Year. Matt Judon, one of the best free agency additions in the NFL, just been playing phenomenal for the Patriots. One of those guys who seemingly makes 3 to 5 plays every single game that can change the outcome. Robert, 14 sacks, just crazy production. A large portion of it without Khalil Mack on the field. Gets a lot of his sacks early in games. You don't really see them show up on the highlights much, just because they're not in those crucial moments. But just the production he's had as a rusher deserves a lot of credit here. I'm definitely going to put Shaq Barrett up there. You see him still in the single digits in terms of sacks, but just that play that he made a couple of weeks ago against Indy, where the Colts are really in control of that game, and he makes that game-changing sack, strips the ball out, and from that point on, the game was never the same. And that's just some of the plays that he delivers on a weekly basis, I feel like, almost. Harold Landry for the Titans. We didn't see him a couple of weeks ago, and I actually wanted to watch the highlights of the game against Jacksonville, 20-0 demolition. Not that much to see there in terms of schematics or anything like that really stood out to me. But Landry, one of the most productive pass rushers in terms of pressures as well. And he was right at the top of the list until a few weeks ago. So he's going to get a vote from me. And then it's really tough, I believe, because you have a lot of these rookies, like a Jalen Phillips from Miami, Azeez Ojulari, and Odafe Owe, who have had some extended stretches where they've looked really good. Leonard Floyd and Ty Bowser, kind of in the same category for me, in terms of those underrated do-it-all outside linebackers, stopping the run, executing spot drops in the pass game, and getting done as rushers. But my final vote here will go to Rashawn Gary. I actually see Preston Smith has half a sack more, but he's been a wrecking ball off the edge for the Packers, especially in the absence of Zadarius Smith. Haven't felt him as much just because of how well Gary has played. I predicted him to be one of those breakout players, and we'll get to a couple more here. Smacking guys in the run game, owning the point of attack, and also as a pass rusher, has worked in his arsenal, not just the power that he has naturally, but working in the speed, some counters off that, just being better at reading drops and adjusting to the guys that he's facing. And then you have some guys here at the top as well. Hassan Reddick, another really good season. Been more consistent than he was last year, where he had those like 3 or 4 sack performances. Not quite up there for me. Marcus Gold Jones here for the Cardinals. Kind of been doing it at different times. When Jones has been out, Golden has produced. You had Jones obviously in the season opener getting half his production. Not quite as consistent throughout the season as I would like them to be. Joey Bosa, not quite as good as his brother this season. You see that 5 forced fumbles, that's a big one. And that has us moving on to the inside guys, which are listed by solo tackles. So maybe not the most trustworthy statistic to tell you how good a player is, just because he's on a crappy defense maybe, and has to clean up the mess. Which I'm not saying that any of these guys at the top here are, but I want to focus on a few other guys before that, which the first one here, Demario Davis, the best off-ball backer in the league this year, I would say. Just incredible how the way that he's shooting down against the run, meeting guys in the backfield and smacking them in the face. Also as a pressure play on passing downs, just running through backs and kind of sorting his way through the trash to get to the quarterback. I don't think there's really any discussion here who the best guy has been at that position. The best guy overall, the one I would choose first, Fred Warner probably still for the 49ers. Just what he does in the pass game, the way that he can control space and be used kind of what we saw with Bobby Wagner early in his career, where he can really legitimately carry the number 3 guy in a trip set on vertical routes on the seams. Then, yeah, of course, Micah Parsons, no idea why he's listed with the inside linebackers when he's actually primarily an edge rusher and been playing a little bit inside. Actually, we saw it last week, where they just want to use him as a Tampa 2 dropper because they know the athleticism that he has and that he can make some plays there. But you look at that, 12.5 sacks. Just as a pure edge rusher, he would be up here, but also as an off-ball linebacker, he's just been playing phenomenal football. And we saw it on display against Washington, where he had a couple of sacks and just kind of took over the game along with those other guys on the edge for the Cowboys. I see that Colts shoe up here, but also down here, Darius Leonard, 5 forced fumbles this season, I believe leads the NFL in that statistic. And he's been one of those guys for several years now, the range that he has at the second level, and the way that he can really shut down guys one-on-one in tackling situations. His skill set is kind of second down along with Fred Warner in terms of the passing game. And he doesn't have a sack yet this season, which is surprising because he's really good. Another one of those guys sorting through the trash, finding a lane for himself as a blitzer and getting home. That's going to pick up probably down the stretch here. And the big reason for the Colts' success recently has been the defense flying around, which he's the number one guy in that. Not really anybody down here that stands out as much. Yeah, Shaq Thompson for the Panthers. Just the speed that he has, controlling sideline to sideline, can legitimately run down guys on speed sweeps and stuff like that. Just been banged up at times as well this season. Eric Hendricks, not his best season, but made some splash plays recently. Deserves his name to be up here. Jordan Hicks remaining on the field, even though they have 2 first-round linebackers down there in Arizona. Just won't give up his spot, and I believe deserves some consideration. But I'm ultimately going to go with Denzel Perryman here first for the Raiders, which I just talked about how the statistic not necessarily that indicative of the type of player that he is. But he's one of those guys, just crazy running guys down in between the tackles, bringing a lot of thump at contact. And what's been kind of crazy about him this season, the improvements that he's made in the pass game, where he was a liability at times when left one-on-one, but a lot more productive, where you see him a lot of times in match zones, where he's left one-on-one with a back or a tight end, and he's been getting the job done for the Raiders. And then finally, another guy here pretty high up, Devondre Campbell for the Packers, deserves a lot of credit as well. Another one of those kind of similar to Denzel Perryman, just been bouncing around, kind of been lost in the shuffle, looked at as a solid backup, but not really established himself as a starter anywhere recently. But he's been playing at a really high level for the Packers, boosting the run defense, and also in the pass game, another one of those guys who's made some improvements, a couple of fumbles forced, has really worked his ass off to be at this level and get this vote here from me over guys like Devon White, Roquan Smith, Bobby Wagner. All deserve to be mentioned because there's always candidates. They're going to be in the voting every single year, but I don't think any of them is having the best season. And so I'm going to go with those guys who have really stood out to me this year. Which, before I say the Luke for the Falcons, these last couple of years, arguably been the best defensive player overall. I don't want anybody to think he's one of those guys that are referenced. Honestly, the defense just cleaning things up. He's an impact player for them in all different facets and deserves some love. But let's move on to the cornerbacks now. Secondary, not as big an issue with the way that it's structured, even though I don't like the safety tags, strong and free safety. They're just so antiquated, especially with how much too high shells we see in the NFL these days, where safeties have to be interchangeable. But like I said, we'll start with the corners here, and he didn't play on Monday night, but Jalen Ramsey, still easily the number one corner in the NFL in my opinion. Arguably the only guy in the NFL right now who you can really call a shutdown corner. Every single week you can put him whatever receiver you want him on, and he's going to win the majority of those battles. But then at the top here, Trevon Diggs, J.C. Jackson, just absolute ball hawks. We saw Diggs this past week, arguably his best coverage game this season against Terry McLaurin when they were matched up, shutting him out in those matchups before McLaurin had to leave in the second half. And I feel like people have been turning on him a little bit because you see some of the big plays that he has given up. There's going to be some of those, and he's not nearly in a class with Jalen Ramsey in terms of just shutting guys out. But what he can do, 9 interceptions, that's just crazy. That way he can play the receiver and the ball at the same time down the field. And I believe some of the big plays, like that long touchdown against the Patriots, for example, that wasn't really his fault, where people see the wrong in him and just think he's a feast of famine player. I don't think that's necessarily it. And same thing with J.C. Jackson, a lot of man coverage, just has a phenomenal feel for turning his head and finding the ball at the last moment. He's not allowed to just sit in zone coverage and drive on routes or anything like that. There's a lot of him being asked as the number one corner in the Patriots scheme, and I don't want anybody to badmouth that. And then move down a little bit, the guy I definitely don't want to miss here, Denzel Awards. Been playing like a top 5 corner this season, consistently taking the X receiver on the opposing team and really shutting him down for large stretches. We saw it against Jamar Chase to some degree, and also making a lot of big plays, excellent tackler on the edge. And then you saw that 100-yard pick six basically they had against the Bengals. He's one of those few guys close to Jalen Ramsey's stratosphere in terms of one of those guys that you can trust in man coverage against the opposing number one on a consistent basis weekly. And then a little further down, I believe, where is he now? Oh yeah, H. Terrell for Falcons. I think the number 2 corner overall in Pro Football Focus grading system, he's starting to turn into one of those shutdown guys where they're heavily relying on him on the backside against the X receiver, matching up one-on-one for large stretches of game, and he's been really holding his own in a tough division for receivers where you have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, no Michael Thomas, so the Saints matchup has been a little easier for him, but been really trustworthy in those one-on-one situations, and one of the few bright spots on this Falcons team overall, the way he's developed in his second season now. And then the final vote, it really comes down, I mean, you have Amani Oruwariye for Lions. I don't want to take anything away from him. He's one of those guys really good at playing the ball. Has had 5 picks this season, obviously, as you can see here, and there's been a few good ones there. I'm not quite sure if I'll put him up there because he's also out quite a few big plays. Xavier Howard for the Miami Dolphins, one of the best man coverage guys, because that's really what Brian Flores asks of his guys. Maybe benefits a little bit from that scheme, even though they do play a lot of man coverage, but they're basically allowed a lot of times to play with the eyes on the quarterback and drive on routes. So that's going to help him out. Kenny Moore, the best nickel in the game today. And then you have a few rookies like Patrick Surtain for the Broncos, been making a lot of big plays recently and really locking it down the boundary. And I really like Asante Samuel Jr. as well for the Chargers. Had a couple of concussions and that's really slowed him down. I had a ticket on him as Defensive Rookie of the Year, I believe. A couple of bucks, and that looked really good early on when he had those 2 picks. But limiting big plays for the air, he's been really good at that. Marshawn Lattimore asked a lot to cover the number 1 receiver on the opposing team as well in Dennis Allen's scheme. But I'm actually going to go with Byron Murphy here for the Cardinals. I just think Arizona deserves a lot of credit for the things that they've done on defense. And Murphy playing inside out, he's so instinctive, anticipating route patterns, man, zone, blitzing off the nickel. He can just really do it all, and he's been playing at a very high level his last couple of years for them. Been their best player in the secondary probably, along with the guys that we'll get to, like a Budda Baker and Jalen Thompson. And just like I mentioned, the interceptions here, don't really say that much. You have Anthony Brown here, and I don't think that far down Bashard Breeland with 2 and 3 interceptions respectively. 2 of the worst starters in the league right now, and that just shows you that not using something like passer rating, which they have access to, really makes no sense in this capacity. Darius Slay, another guy I just want to mention here. I think he has like 3 touchdowns now this season. And then Darius Slay, I think, has to be mentioned here as well. Making plays for his team. I think he has like 3 long touchdowns now, something like that. And still getting the job done, tackling and covering at the corner spot. But that brings us to the safety position. And once again, I don't really understand why they have it split into strong and free safety. But I guess we'll just go with it. First name here, Derwin James for the Chargers. Great bounce back season after he was really fighting for some injuries early in his career. Let's hope he can stay healthy and play at that level, because really he's one of those do-it-all guys. And Brandon Staley is starting to deploy him in different ways, other than just leaving him back in his 2 high safety shells and not really allowing him to play closer to the line of scrimmage. Then let's move on. Jordan Poyer, one of the best safeties in the league overall this season. You see 5 interceptions, but just on a play-by-play basis, the way he can drop them and help stop the run, but also in deep coverage, living in the high post, when they don't have Micah Hyde up there because they can really use them in interchangeable fashion. Tyrann Mathieu, maybe not his best season, he's missed some time, but still a very, very good play on the back end for the Chiefs, and really patrolling the secondary for this group. Then we have Budda Baker for the Cardinals, another guy, 3 interceptions. I feel like he's getting bigger and bigger for safety, and just one of those guys, super tough dude, bringing the hammer as a tackler, and also having soft hands when the ball does come his way. And from that point on, it gets a little bit tougher Chuck Clark, one of the more underrated safeties in the NFL. Who else do we have here? Eddie Jackson. I don't see what I saw a couple of years ago, unfortunately. Malcolm Jenkins at an advanced age along with Kareem Jackson, but still playing very well. But I'm actually going to go with the next two guys. Donald Savage. He's going to be a choice here for me for the Packers. Was one of my favorite college prospects to evaluate a couple of years ago. Just a little missile flying around the field. And you see the Packers with a lot of quarters coverage, where he's allowed to drive on routes in front of him, and he's phenomenal to click and close, make plays on the ball, and separate the receiver from the ball, but also running the alley against the run from the deep spot, and limiting big plays that could be happening. And then, very tempted here, I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to go with Justin Reed here of the Texans, along with Jonathan Grenard, the two really only consistent players on the Texans. Defense, that is, along with Brandon Cooks, maybe on offense, the only three guys that you can trust overall on this team. Has a couple of picks and a forced fumble, so he's been making some impact plays and just in the position to make some stops for this team. I think the defense has actually been better than most people give it credit for, just because of how bad the offense is, setting them up in negative positions. But yeah, not really anything else that sticks out here necessarily. Adrian Phillips, another one of those pieces to the Patriots secondary, but you have so many guys getting it done for them. Harrison Smith has been doing it for a long time now, finally starting to slow down a little bit, even though he's still playing at a fairly high level. And then you also have a name like Jonathan Abram up here, because they're listed by solo tackles, which is one of my big gripes here, because I'm not even sure if he should be out there in the field for the Raiders too much at this point. But let's move on to the free safety spot, I guess, which is the funny part here, because I would never label guys like Kyle Duggar free safety, or maybe Taylor Rapp. Kari Willis just makes no sense. But for here, you see those three guys with 5 interceptions leading the category. Kevin Byard, Xavier McKinney, and Justin Simmons, all very worthy of being up here. Byard in particular, arguably the best safety in football this season, along with Simmons. Just how instinctive he is, finding himself in the right spots around the football. That pick 6 that he had against the Rams a good month ago now. One of the craziest plays that I've ever seen from a safety. Justin Simmons getting the job done every single week for the Broncos, where you put him in the high post, put him in man coverage against tight ends. He can do a lot of different things for you, and a really good last line of defense. And Xavier McKinney also had 5 interceptions now for a bad Giants team. He was another one of those guys I had labeled as a breakout candidate for the season. Primarily playing in the slot actually last year, but he's more now at the deep safety spots and really did in coverage. Then I'm going to give another vote to Micah Hyde, so you have those two Bills safeties, both very worthy of being up here. Does a great job of limiting those big plays through the air for the Bills. Then I'm going to put Adrian Amos here, so you have those two Packers safeties as well. Another one of those guys plays the safety position in a safe way, meaning he's not going to let guys get over the top of him when he's put in positions where he has to defend the deep ball. Super consistent tackler, just a very key piece of this Packers defense. Those two safeties in general, I don't think a lot of people realize how important they are to what they're doing. Now that Joe Barry as the defensive coordinator, with a lot more cover 4 and those two safeties being relied upon to patrol everything that's going on between the numbers. And then my final votes, it's a bit of a tougher one here. John Johnson III for the Browns, maybe not quite as good as he was in Los Angeles, but has made a few big plays for this team recently. You have Javon Holland, the rookie for the Dolphins, has been getting it done whatever they ask of him, like blitzing Lamar Jackson 25 times, and then in other games being used as a deep safety, where he shows great range and ability to make plays on the ball. Minkah Fitzpatrick missing some time, and just not as impactful this season, I believe, even though he has the capability of being the best safety overall in all of football. Just not quite there this year. Jalen Thompson has to be mentioned here, along with Jimmy Ward, those two NFC West guys, quietly getting the job done for the teams. But my final vote is going to go to Anton Winfield Jr., another one of those guys who I was very high on coming out of college, and had another great play from the safety spot this year. You go back to that Indy game, that jump ball that was up there for Michael Pittman Jr., that, depending on who comes down with that catch, might win that game. And Winfield, despite being like 4 or 5 inches shorter than Pittman, comes down with that big interception. Great trigger to come down into high shells and make plays on the ball. But you can put him in the high post and really trust the things that he's doing. So yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. Marcus Williams for the Saints, having another very strong season, kind of under the radar as well. But let's just quickly run through the special teams here. I just don't have that much insight to give because I don't value them the way I do with offensive and defensive players. But what I do know, Justin Tucker, the best kicker I've seen in my lifetime. Daniel Carson, really good for the Raiders, banging in long field goals. I think Nick Folk leads the league with field goals and also one of the best percentages. Inside the 50s, almost automatic. Matt Gay for the Rams, just one miss this year with a long 55. Greg Zuerlein, a little too inconsistent for me. But Chris Boswell, only 2 misses this year as well. And some crucial kicks for the Steelers. And then my final vote is going to go to Elliott, another one of those guys, just 2 misses, kicking out in the win in Philly with a 58 that's long snappers. I'm not going to act like I really know what's going on there. So I'm just going to move on to punters here. So we have Michael Dixon first for the Seahawks here. He's really a weapon for them at that spot, pinning guys inside the 20 and having a lot of tricks up his sleeve. A.J. Cole for the Raiders, I think leads the league in net average per punt. Preston Harvin III, the rookie for the Steelers. He's one of those guys who can really boom it and win field position battle that way. Cameron Johnston for the Texans. He's another one of those bright spots for the Texans, even though you don't necessarily want those guys to be punters. And then the last two, Jake Bailey. Bill Belichick loves his special teamers, can really hit those coffin corners. And then finally, I think I'm going to go with Sam Cook. At an advanced age, just one of those guys who's seen it all, can do so many variations, just kind of crazy the way that he can give different bounces to the ball, and it looks different at flights to the punt returner. Then the return specialists, another thing that's really weird, being ranked by the amount of kick returns that they've had, so getting credit for how bad the defense is, I guess. I'm going to go first one here, I have to scroll out a little bit. Keanu Wangu, the rookie for the Vikings, the only guy with 2 kickoff return touchdowns, and he's missed like half the year, so he definitely deserves to be up there. Devin Duvernay, until recently, or maybe even still, has the best punt return average in the league. We saw just Jaquin Grant for the Bears. He ripped off a big one against the Packers, and as long as he doesn't drop some like he did in Miami, he's really a weapon. One of those guys who can just fly. Isaiah McKenzie, kind of similar for the Bills here. We saw him rip off some big ones in the return game at times. Tony Pollard only does kick returns, but I just want to see him in the Pro Bowl, get some snaps on offense, just how dynamic he is, the explosiveness that he brings to the table. And then finally, I think I'm going to go with DeAndre Carter for Washington. He's also fairly consistent with the way that he brings it back, has a touch into his resume, and does kickoffs and punts, which I personally like a lot. And then finally we get onto the special teamers, which we're just going to go with the 3 leading tackles on special teams in Nick Bellore, Ashton Dulin, and JT Gray here. Then we're going to scroll a little bit further down to Nick Niemann, one of the best at covering kicks. Trenton Cannon, I think he plays every single special team for the 49ers if I'm not mixing things up here. And then the final one, Frankie Louvu, as he for the Panthers, one of the better special teams aces in the league in my opinion. But that's going to do it. Thank you so much for watching. Took longer than I expected it. Hope you enjoyed this format. Certainly didn't cost me as much time as those hour-long weekly previews where I have to look through all the numbers and analyze the matchups. Even though I did try to watch a bunch of films still to make my decisions. Either way, let me know what you think here in the comments or on any of my social media outlets, which you can find linked down below in the description. Next week is Christmas, so I won't have time to post a full article or video. Active around bowl season on Instagram and Twitter, and have a few things in the work as we get to the home stretch of the NFL season. Make sure to stay tuned, and happy holidays already from me. So until then, see you later. Peace!